My sister poured our dying mother's heart medication down the drain, then demanded I sign a contract admitting I owed her for existing. When I begged her to stop, she smiled and said, "Sign it, or start planning a funeral you can't afford." I just stared at her. That was 6 months ago. Yesterday, she saw something on her phone, went completely still, and hasn't eaten since. When did your greedy sibling go way too far? My sister kept a running total of every dollar our parents spent on me and demanded they match it penny for penny because she said love could be measured in receipts, and I was stealing her inheritance one birthday gift at a time. Polly was 5 years older than me and had always been obsessed with money. After I arrived, she became convinced that every dollar spent on me was stolen directly from her future. She kept a notebook called The Theft Log, where she recorded every diaper, every bottle, every toy with prices and running totals. She'd sneak into my nursery and whisper, "You're expensive," while calculating how much my formula cost. On my 10th birthday, Polly gave me a gift in front of our whole family. It was a printed invoice for everything our parents had spent on me since birth. $73,847.23. "This is what you owe me," she announced. She explained her new system where every expense had to be matched. If mom bought me school supplies worth $50, Polly got $50 cash. If dad paid for my dentist appointment, she got the equivalent in her savings account. She'd already made spreadsheets with 10 years of backdated calculations our parents now owed her. Never mind that they'd been spending money on her that whole time too. Conveniently, that money didn't count. Our parents nervously tried to reason with her, but Polly had prepared for this. She'd researched inheritance law and threatened to sue them for financial favoritism. To avoid her meltdowns, they started giving in. Every purchase for me meant writing Polly a check. She wore a calculator on a chain around her neck, constantly tallying. Every normal childhood experience became a transaction. They started skipping things I needed just to avoid doubling the cost. When I needed braces, they said no because they couldn't afford 2 sets worth, even though Polly didn't need them. My teeth stayed crooked. I learned to refuse gifts, skip meals, wear old clothes just to avoid triggering her calculator. When I got into college, Polly lost her mind. The tuition was more than our parents could possibly match in cash. She demanded they either give her the equivalent immediately or refuse to pay for my education, since she had no interest in college. When they took out loans for me, she insisted on equal loans for herself, which she immediately cashed out. She said I was stealing her future with every semester. I worked 3 jobs to minimize what my parents paid, but Polly still calculated room, board, textbooks, even my toothpaste into what they owed her. Things got worse when mom got sick. She needed expensive treatments that insurance only partially covered. I dropped out of school to help with costs and care, but Polly saw this differently. Every medical bill was money stolen from her inheritance. She demanded half of all treatment costs be deposited into her account, or she'd sue for elder abuse through financial manipulation. She actually filed papers claiming I was forcing our parents to spend their savings on unnecessary care to drain Polly's future inheritance. I'll never forget the day mom needed emergency surgery. While dad and I sat terrified in the waiting room, Polly arrived with her calculator and laptop. She'd researched the procedure costs and wanted a bank transfer before mom went under. $43,000 for the surgery, she announced. "I'll take a payment plan, but I want post-dated checks today." When I told her mom might die, she said that would actually be cheaper and started calculating funeral costs versus extended care. Mom survived but came home needing round-the-clock care we couldn't afford. I moved back to help, but Polly presented us with an invoice for my free rent that she demanded in cash. She'd appear with receipts for my shower water, my portion of heat, my percentage of Wi-Fi usage. One day I found mom crying over bills. She needed medication we couldn't afford because we'd been paying Polly matching costs for every medical expense. I told Polly she was culling mom with her greed. She laughed and showed me her master spreadsheet. Everything our parents had spent on me versus her since birth. According to her calculations, they still owed her $247,892.41. "I'm just taking what's mine," she said. "You're the thief here." I decided to end this insanity. I gathered every receipt, every bank record, every one of Polly's psychotic spreadsheets dating back 20 years. I found something she'd hidden. Deposits from mom and dad she'd never recorded. Gifts she'd lied about. Years of theft disguised as fairness. She'd actually taken far more than me, but cooked the books. I confronted her with the evidence, saying I'd expose her to our parents unless she stopped. Polly smiled calmly and pulled out her phone. She showed me a video of mom's medication bottles. While I watched in horror, she opened each one and poured the pills down the sink. "I did this an hour ago," she said. "Mom's next refill isn't for 2 weeks. The pharmacy won't fill early without paying full price. That's about $3,000 you don't have." She leaned closer, calculator in hand. "So here's the new deal. You're going to sign this document admitting you owe me everything in my spreadsheets. You'll pay me monthly for the rest of your life, or mom goes without her heart medication. Your choice." I looked at this sister who'd turned love into ledgers and family into transactions. Mom needed those medications to survive. Without them, she had maybe days. Polly held out the contract and a pen, her calculator ready to compute my first payment. "Sign it," she said, "or start planning a funeral you can't afford." I stared at the contract, my hands trembling. The pen felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Mom's face flashed in my mind, pale and fragile from months of illness. $3,000 for medication. Money we didn't have because we'd been feeding Polly's greed for years. My phone buzzed. A text from dad asking if I'd picked up mom's prescriptions yet. He had no idea what Polly had done. I glanced at my sister, who was already calculating interest rates on her calculator, completely unfazed by the fact she'd just signed mom's potential death warrant. I set the pen down. Polly's eyes narrowed. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, opening every cabinet. Empty med bottles lined the shelves like tombstones. The heart medication, the blood pressure pills, the anti-clotting substances that kept mom from having another stroke, all gone. Polly followed me, waving the contract. She'd laminated it, of course. Everything with her had to be official, documented, filed in triplicate. I ignored her and grabbed my car keys. At the pharmacy, I begged. The pharmacist, Janet, knew our family well after years of mom's prescriptions. She shook her head sadly when I explained the situation, minus the part about my psychotic sister. Insurance rules were strict. Early refills required full payment or a police report for stolen medication. $3,000. I had maybe $300 in my account. I drove to 3 more pharmacies, hoping for different answers. Each one quoted the same price, the same rules. One pharmacist suggested the emergency room, but that would cost even more, and mom was too weak for unnecessary hospital trips. Back home, I found Polly in mom's room with her laptop, photographing mom's medical equipment. She was calculating its resale value, fingers flying crying over her calculator. Mom slept fitfully, unaware that her own daughter was essentially planning her estate sale while she still breathed. I pulled Polly into the hallway. She immediately started recording on her phone, another one of her tactics. Everything had to be documented for her imaginary future lawsuits. I tried reasoning first. Explained that without medication, Mom would deteriorate quickly. Hospital costs would drain any inheritance faster than medication would. Polly just smiled and showed me another spreadsheet. She'd already calculated the cost difference between extended hospitalization and funeral expenses. The funeral was cheaper. Dad came home from his second job, exhausted and confused by the tension. Polly immediately presented him with an invoice for that day's electricity usage, breaking down my percentage versus hers. He paid it without question, too tired to fight, too struck down by years of her manipulation. I couldn't tell him about the medication yet. He had a weak heart himself, and the shock might trigger something. Instead, I spent the evening calling every resource I could think of. Medicare wouldn't help with early refills. The prescription assistance programs had waiting periods. Local charities were tapped out. That night, I lay awake calculating my own numbers. Not money, but time. How long could Mom last without her pills? The doctor had been clear. Missing even a few days could trigger a cardiac event. A week would be catastrophic. By morning, I had a plan. Not a good one, but better than signing my life away to Polly's madness. I drove to the bank and applied for a personal loan. The banker, who'd known our family for years, looked concerned when I mentioned medical expenses. The application would take days to process, time Mom didn't have. I applied anyway, then hit 3 more banks. Same story everywhere. Polly was waiting when I got home, contract in hand. She'd added new clauses. Now she wanted compound interest and a percentage of any future earnings I might have. Her calculator showed projected payments until I was 80. I found Mom struggling to breathe, her lips slightly blue. Without her medication, fluid was already building in her lungs. I helped her sit up, propped pillows behind her, opened windows for fresh air. Polly watched from the doorway, calculating how much my time was worth at minimum wage. The next morning, Mom was worse. Her ankles had swollen overnight, another sign of heart failure. How does someone turn family into math like this? Polly's notebook with baby costs and whispering, "You're expensive," to a baby. I wonder what makes a 5-year-old start thinking that way. She could barely walk to the bathroom. I called her doctor, who urged immediate medication or hospitalization. When I explained our insurance situation, he fell silent. Then he suggested something: the samples closet. Doctors often had medication samples. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it might buy us time. I raced to the clinic. The doctor who'd treated Mom for years looked grim when I explained. He couldn't legally give me samples for an existing patient, but he could educate me about the medication while I happened to be standing near his sample closet. I left with a week's worth of pills hidden in educational brochures. Mom's color improved within hours of the first dose. She could breathe easier. The swelling started to recede, but a week wasn't enough. I needed a real solution. I started selling things. My laptop, my phone, my college textbooks gathering dust. Each sale felt like admitting defeat, but Mom needed those pills. Polly noticed, of course. She demanded receipts, calculating that any money I raised should technically be split with her since I was living in her house. The pawn shop gave me $500 for my grandmother's ring, the one thing I'd kept from her estate. Polly had gotten the rest, naturally, after producing receipts showing Grandma had spent $12 more on my birthday gifts over the years. I gathered another $1,000 from odd jobs, plasma donation, and begging friends for loans. Still short. Mom's week of samples was running out. That's when I remembered Polly's evidence videos. She recorded everything, stored it all on her laptop. Years of family moments turned into financial documentation, but what else might be there? While Polly was at her weekly accountant meeting, I slipped into her room. Her laptop was password protected, but Polly was predictable. The password was her favorite number, the amount she claimed our parents owed her. Her files were meticulously organized, folders within folders, all labeled with dates and dollar amounts. I found the videos she'd taken of destroying Mom's medication, multiple angles, time-stamped, with her narration explaining her leverage strategy. But I found more. Years of recordings where she admitted to lying about expenses, inflating costs, hiding gifts from our parents, videos where she laughed about manipulating Dad's guilt and Mom's illness. She'd documented her own fraud, too arrogant to realize she'd created evidence against herself. I copied everything onto a drive. Then I found something else. Her actual bank statements. The real ones, not the edited versions she showed our parents. Deposits they'd made that she'd never reported. Gifts from relatives she'd claimed never arrived. Investment accounts in her name funded by money she'd extorted from our parents over the years. The front door opened. Polly was home early. I closed the laptop, slipped out through the window. My heart pounded as I heard her footsteps in the hallway. The drive burned in my pocket like evidence of my own crime, but it was nothing compared to what she'd done. That evening, Polly presented me with a new contract. This one included a clause where I'd forfeit any claim to inheritance, plus monthly payments indexed to inflation. She'd calculated my entire life's earnings potential and wanted 40%. I pretended to consider it while Mom dozed in her chair, breathing labored despite the samples. 3 days of medication left. The pharmacy had called twice about the pending refills. $3,000 might as well have been $3 million. Polly pulled out her phone to show me more videos. This time, she'd recorded herself at the pharmacy, confirming they wouldn't refill early. She'd actually gone to verify I couldn't work around her plan. The thoroughness of her cruelty was breathtaking. Dad walked in as Polly was explaining the interest calculations. He looked between us, confused by the tension. Polly immediately switched to victim mode, claiming I was trying to steal her rightful inheritance by forcing unnecessary medical expenses. I watched Dad's face crumble. He'd worked 2 jobs for 30 years, saved every penny, and it still wasn't enough to satisfy one daughter or save his wife. The weight of failure bent his shoulders. That night, I made my decision. Polly had turned our family into a business. Maybe it was time I learned to speak her language. I spent the next morning at the library, researching everything I could about financial fraud and elder abuse. The evidence on my drive painted a clear picture, but I needed to understand how to use it effectively. Polly had years of experience manipulating our parents. I had days to learn how to fight back. The librarian, an elderly woman who'd helped me with school projects years ago, noticed my stack of legal books. She brought me coffee and a concerned look. I explained I was helping a friend with a family situation. She nodded knowingly and pointed me toward resources about financial exploitation within families. Back home, I found Polly had installed a lock on the medicine cabinet. She'd also placed security cameras in the kitchen and living room, all connected to her phone. She was documenting everything, building her case that I was the real threat to our parents' finances. changes. Mom's breathing grew more labored by the hour. The sample medications were helping, but not enough. She needed her full prescription regimen. I helped her to the couch, adjusting pillows to ease her breathing. Polly appeared with her calculator, computing the cost of my caregiving at professional rates. I decided to test something. While Polly watched, I pulled out my wallet and handed Dad $40. I told him it was for groceries. Polly's fingers flew over her calculator. She demanded her matching $40 immediately. Dad, exhausted and confused, reached for his wallet. I stopped him and showed Polly the grocery receipt from my wallet. The $40 was reimbursement for groceries I'd already bought. According to her own rules, this wasn't new spending on me. It was repayment. Polly's face reddened. She hadn't expected me to start documenting like her. She spent the next hour creating new subcategories in her spreadsheet for reimbursements versus direct spending. I used the time to slip into Dad's home office and scan through old bank statements. If Polly could build a case with numbers, so could I. The statements revealed something interesting. 5 years ago, Polly had convinced our parents to add her as a joint account holder for emergency purposes. Since then, regular transfers had been leaving their account, always just under the amount that would trigger banking alerts. Small, consistent bleeds they probably never noticed. I photographed everything with an old digital camera I'd found in the closet. Polly had access to my phone through family sharing. She couldn't track this camera. That afternoon, Mom's condition worsened. Her lips turned blue despite sitting upright. Her fingers swelled. I recognized the signs of fluid retention the doctor had warned about. Without her diuretics, her body was drowning from the inside. I called the doctor again. He couldn't prescribe new samples so soon, but he mentioned that the hospital pharmacy sometimes had patient assistance programs. If Mom was admitted, they might be able to help. But admission meant tests, evaluations, costs that would trigger Polly's calculator. Polly must have been monitoring my calls. She appeared in the doorway with printed hospital admission estimates. Minimum $20,000 for a cardiac evaluation. She wanted her half up front, or she'd claim I was forcing unnecessary procedures on Mom. I made a decision that felt like betrayal, but might save Mom's life. I agreed to Polly's latest contract with one modification. Instead of lifetime payments, I'd give her a lump sum from selling everything I owned. She calculated quickly, greed overcoming suspicion. My car, remaining jewelry, electronics, even my clothes had value. She estimated $15,000 total. She agreed, pulling out her phone to record the agreement. I signed her contract, and she immediately began scheduling times to inventory my possessions. What she didn't know was that I'd already sold most valuable items for Mom's medication. The $15,000 she calculated was based on items that no longer existed. While Polly celebrated her victory, updating spreadsheets and calculating interest, I helped Mom to the car. I told Polly I was taking Mom for fresh air. She was too busy computing her windfall to pay attention. At the hospital, I explained our insurance situation to the intake nurse. She looked at Mom's blue lips and swollen ankles and marked the admission as emergency cardiac evaluation. The billing department could sort out payments later. Mom needed help now. The doctors confirmed what I feared. Without medication, Mom's heart was failing. They started 4 diuretics immediately, and within hours, the swelling began to reduce. Her breathing eased. Color returned to her face. The hospital's patient advocate mentioned they had programs for medication assistance, but paperwork would take days. I stayed with Mom through the night, holding her hand while she slept. Hospital monitors beeped steadily, reassuring rhythms that her heart was still fighting. Around dawn, my phone exploded with messages from Polly. She'd discovered my deception about the possessions and was calculating penalties and interest on my breach of contract. She arrived at the hospital with her laptop and portable printer, ready to serve me with new documents. But she made a mistake. In her rage about my deception, she brought the wrong folder. Instead of her new contracts, she'd grabbed her evidence folder, the one with videos of her destroying Mom's medication. I saw my chance. While Polly set up her mobile office in the waiting room, I asked a passing nurse about hospital security. I explained my sister had videos on her laptop of destroying patient medication. What makes Polly film herself doing bad things and then bring those exact videos to the hospital? I'm really curious why she keeps such detailed proof of her own tricks. Does she think nobody will ever check her folders, or does recording everything just make her feel powerful somehow? The nurse's expression hardened. She called security and the patient advocate. Polly was deep in calculations when hospital security approached. They asked to speak with her about the medication incident. She laughed, thinking I'd made up stories. Then she opened her laptop to show them her evidence of my financial crimes. Instead, her organized folders appeared on screen, including one labeled medication leverage. The security guard asked her to open it. Polly, still confident in her righteousness, clicked the folder. Her own videos played, her pouring pills down the sink, her voice explaining how she'd use Mom's health as leverage. The security supervisor immediately called the hospital administrator and social services. Polly tried to close the laptop, but the damage was done. The patient advocate had seen enough. She explained that destroying prescribed medication was a serious form of elder abuse. The hospital would be filing reports with appropriate agencies. Polly's face went white as she realized her meticulous documentation had become evidence against her. While Polly dealt with security, I met with the financial counselor. The hospital had emergency funds for cases like ours, where family members had been financially exploited. They could cover Mom's immediate care and help us apply for longer-term assistance. The counselor mentioned that with evidence of financial abuse, we might qualify for expedited processing. I handed over the drive with Polly's financial records. The counselor's eyes widened as she reviewed years of hidden transfers, inflated expenses, and recorded admissions of fraud. This was more than enough to establish a pattern of exploitation. Dad arrived at the hospital confused and panicked. Polly had called him, claiming I'd kidnapped Mom and was forcing unnecessary medical procedures. He found Mom sitting up in bed, breathing normally for the first time in days, color in her cheeks. The contrast between Polly's claims and reality finally opened his eyes. I showed him the bank statements I'd found. His hands shook as he recognized the pattern of transfers he'd never noticed. 20 here, 50 there, sometimes hundreds, all moving from their joint account to Polly's personal accounts. Over 5 years, she'd taken nearly $30,000 beyond what they'd given her directly. The hospital social worker joined us to explain the situation. With the video evidence and financial records, they were required to report the elder abuse. Polly would likely face investigation, but more importantly, they could help us protect Mom and Dad's remaining assets from further exploitation. Polly burst into the room, calculator in hand, demanding to know who would pay her half of the hospital bills. The social worker calmly explained that Polly was no longer allowed unsupervised contact with our parents. Security escorted her out as she screamed about contracts and ownership. scholarship. Over the next days, Mom's condition improved dramatically. With proper medication, her heart stabilized. The swelling disappeared. She could walk without gasping for breath. The hospital's assistance program covered her immediate needs while we worked on long-term solutions. Dad seemed to age years in those days, realizing how blind he'd been to Polly's manipulation. He started the painful process of removing her from bank accounts and changing passwords. The bank, once alerted to the elder abuse report, helped him recover some recent transfers and set up protections against future exploitation. I found a part-time job at the hospital gift shop to help with expenses while caring for Mom. It didn't pay much, but every dollar helped. Without Polly's constant demands for matching funds, our parents' modest income actually covered their needs. Polly tried everything to regain control. She sent invoices for emotional damages from being excluded from the hospital. She calculated the value of her lost time investigating my fraud. She even tried billing our parents for the gas she used driving to the hospital. Each document she sent became more evidence of her obsession. The investigation moved slowly but steadily. Investigators found patterns going back years. Polly had claimed dependent status on our parents for tax benefits while simultaneously taking thousands in unreported transfers. She'd opened credit cards in their names, maxing them out and leaving our parents responsible for the debt. Mom grew stronger each day. We established new routines, morning medications, afternoon walks, evening exercises to strengthen her heart. Without the stress of Polly's constant calculations, Mom smiled more. She started talking about the future instead of just surviving each day. One morning, I found Dad in his office, surrounded by boxes of receipts and statements. He was trying to calculate exactly how much Polly had taken over the years. I gently took the calculator from his hands. We didn't need to play Polly's game anymore. The investigators would handle the numbers. We needed to focus on healing. Polly's accountant, the one she'd met with weekly, contacted us. He'd been growing concerned about discrepancies in her reporting. When he learned about the investigation, he provided records showing Polly had been hiding assets and income while claiming poverty to our parents. The depth of her deception was staggering. The hospital discharged Mom with a stable medication plan and follow-up appointments. The assistance programs covered her prescriptions for the next 6 months while we worked on permanent solutions. Home felt different without Polly's constant presence and calculations. I converted Polly's old room into a recovery space for Mom. We removed the locks she'd installed, the cameras she'd hidden, the dozens of calculators she'd left behind. In their place, we put comfortable chairs, soft lighting, and family photos from before everything became a transaction. Dad started attending a support group for family members affected by financial exploitation. He learned he wasn't alone. Many families had similar stories of adult children who turned love into leverage. The group helped him understand that giving in to Polly hadn't been love, it had been enabling her obsession. Polly made one last attempt to regain control. She showed up at the house with a new contract, this one offering to forgive our debts to her in exchange for restored access to our parents' finances. She'd calculated the value of her forgiveness at exactly the amount in their retirement accounts. Dad met her at the door. For the first time in years, he didn't reach for his wallet. He simply told her that love couldn't be calculated, family wasn't a business, and she needed help for her obsession. He offered to pay for therapy if she'd accept it. She laughed and waved her calculator, but Dad quietly closed the door. Through the window, I watched Polly stand on the porch, frantically calculating on her phone. She seemed smaller somehow, diminished without an audience for her spreadsheets. Eventually, she left, but not before sliding a final invoice under the door for the emotional labor of the visit. The investigation concluded with Polly being required to pay restitution for the medication she destroyed and the money she'd taken through fraudulent means. She was also barred from any financial involvement with our parents. The legal consequences were less important than the family ones. She'd broken trust that couldn't be calculated or repaid. Mom continued to improve. Her heart, freed from the stress of constant financial drain, grew stronger. She started gardening again, something she'd given up when every seed packet triggered Polly's calculator. Dad took early retirement to spend more time with her, finally able to enjoy the fruits of decades of hard work. I returned to school part-time, studying healthcare administration. My experience navigating Mom's care and the hospital assistance programs inspired me to help other families facing similar challenges. The financial aid office helped me find grants and scholarships that didn't require matching payments to anyone. Polly sent occasional messages, always with calculations attached. She'd compute the value of missed birthdays, the cost of family gatherings she wasn't invited to, the monetary worth of relationships she'd destroyed. We stopped opening them. Some things couldn't be reduced to numbers, no matter how many decimal places she used. The investigation's findings gave us leverage, but Polly wasn't finished. She started showing up at odd hours, trying different tactics. One morning, I caught her attempting to jimmy the lock on Dad's car, calculator in hand, ready to compute the depreciation value she claimed we owed her for emotional vehicle damage. I documented everything with the old camera, building our own evidence file. Polly's desperation grew more visible each day. She'd lost her primary income source, and her obsession had nowhere to focus except increasingly bizarre calculations. The bank helped us discover more hidden accounts. Polly had been siphoning money for over a decade, not just 5 years. The total approached $60,000, though recovering it would take time. Each discovery felt like peeling back layers of deception. Mom's recovery continued steadily. The hospital's medication program transitioned to a permanent assistance plan. She could garden for hours now, her breathing steady and sure. Dad built raised beds so she wouldn't have to bend as much, a simple gesture that would have triggered Polly's calculator before. I found more evidence while cleaning out old boxes. Polly had been manipulating our parents since high school, creating fake school expenses and pocketing the money. Report cards she'd altered to show activities that required fees, permission slips for trips that never happened. The paper trail went back 20 years. Polly escalated her attempts to regain control. The way Polly's own folders become evidence against her is incredible. She organized everything so carefully that she basically built the case herself. I'm trying to understand what goes through someone's mind when they label a folder medication leverage and think that's normal behavior. She filed complaints with Adult Protective Services, claiming I was isolating our parents. The investigator who came to check found Mom teaching me her pie recipe while Dad fixed the kitchen sink. Hardly signs of isolation or abuse. The investigator actually helped us file additional protections. With Polly's documented pattern of false reports, we could request restraining provisions. Not a full restraining order, but enough to stop her constant harassment. Polly's next move surprised us. She contacted distant relatives, spinning tales of being cut off from her dying mother. She calculated the emotional manipulation value of each call, I'm sure. But these relatives knew our family. They'd watched Polly's obsession grow over the years. Most simply stopped taking her calls. One cousin did visit, concerned about the family drama. He found Mom healthier than she'd been in years. Dad relaxed and smiling. We showed him some of Polly's invoices and spreadsheets. He left shaking his head, muttering about getting his own finances checked after seeing what family could do. The restitution hearings began. Polly arrived with boxes of her own documentation, ready to prove every cent was justified. But her own meticulous records worked against her. Every video, every spreadsheet, every calculated manipulation became evidence of financial abuse. She tried to represent herself, calculating the savings on legal fees. The judge patiently explained that destroying medication and extorting family members weren't standard financial transactions. Polly actually pulled out her calculator to dispute this, computing the market value of leverage. The judgment required Polly to repay $20,000 for the stolen funds they could prove, plus the cost of Mom's destroyed medication. Payment plans were arranged based on her actual income, not her inflated calculations of what she deserved. Polly's response was predictable. She sent invoices for the cost of attending court, the value of her time spent on restitution paperwork, even the emotional toll of being held accountable. We filed them with all her other documentation, evidence of an obsession that hadn't changed. Mom's health stabilized completely. She joined a cardiac rehabilitation program, strengthening her heart through careful exercise. Dad drove her to each session, finally free to support his wife without matching payments to anyone. I continued working at the hospital gift shop while taking classes. The flexible schedule let me help with Mom's appointments and Dad's adjustment to retirement. Our income was modest but sufficient without Polly's constant drain. Polly tried one last major manipulation. She showed up claiming to be pregnant, calculating the child support our parents would owe as grandparents. She had spreadsheets showing projected costs through college, but she'd made a mistake. Her own documentation showed she'd been claiming infertility for insurance benefits, another fraud to add to the list. The authorities expanded their investigation based on this new evidence. Insurance fraud carried serious penalties. Polly's careful documentation of her false claims made prosecution straightforward. She'd calculated herself into a corner. During this time, we learned to be a family again. Dad rediscovered woodworking, making furniture without worrying about matching funds. Mom taught me her mother's recipes, sharing stories that had nothing to do with money. We played board games that didn't involve calculators. Polly's final court appearance resulted in probation and mandated counseling for her financial obsession. The judge ordered her to attend therapy specifically designed for people who'd turned relationships into transactions. She tried to negotiate a reduced sentence based on the therapy's cost, but the judge wasn't interested in her calculations. The restitution payments began arriving monthly. Small amounts, but symbolic of accountability. We put them directly toward Mom's medical expenses, money finally flowing the right direction. I graduated with my healthcare administration degree. The hospital offered me a full-time position helping families navigate financial assistance programs. My experience with Mom's care and Polly's exploitation made me passionate about protecting vulnerable patients from financial abuse. Dad sold some of his woodworking projects at local craft fairs. Not for much money, just enough to cover materials and have spending money for dates with Mom. They'd go to matinee movies and split popcorn, simple pleasures that felt luxurious after years of calculated deprivation. Polly sent a final message on what would have been her collection day, the anniversary of when she'd first presented her childhood invoice. She'd calculated the total value of our relationship, negative $43,000, according to her math. We didn't respond. Mom marked 1 year medication stable with a small party, just close family and friends, nothing that would trigger calculations. She baked her own cake, tended her thriving garden, and danced with Dad in the kitchen. Her heart kept steady rhythm. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, without the weight of constant financial scrutiny. We'd removed all Polly's hidden cameras, her locks, her monitoring devices. In their place hung family photos from before money mattered more than people. I sometimes wondered if Polly's therapy was helping, if she was learning to see relationships as more than transactions, but I couldn't dwell on it. We had our own healing to focus on, our own life to rebuild. Dad framed one thing from Polly's collection, her first theft log entry from when I was born, not as a reminder of pain, but of how far we'd come. Below it, he wrote simply, "Love is not a transaction." The investigation officially closed with Polly prohibited from any financial involvement with our parents. She couldn't access their accounts, couldn't demand matching funds, couldn't calculate their worth. The legal system had finally put boundaries on her obsession. Mom returned to volunteering at the library, something she'd given up when every hour had a calculated value. She helped elderly patrons find large print books and taught basic computer skills. The librarian who'd helped me research financial abuse became her close friend. Our new normal settled in gradually. Breakfast without invoices, shopping without calculations, family dinners where the only numbers discussed were recipe measurements. We'd learned to be family again, imperfect but genuine. The day Polly made her first restitution payment without attaching an invoice, we knew something had shifted. Just a check, no calculations or demands for credit. Maybe therapy was working. Maybe she was learning that some things couldn't be reduced to numbers. Mom's garden produced abundantly that summer. She gave away vegetables to neighbors, no ledger keeping track of who owed what. Dad built a small greenhouse so she could garden year-round. I helped them can tomatoes for winter, filling the pantry with provisions that had no price tags attached. Looking back, Polly's obsession had nearly destroyed us, but we'd survived by refusing to accept her calculation of our worth. Love couldn't be invoiced. Family wasn't a business, and some debts could never be collected, no matter how many decimal places you calculated. Mom's heart medication arrived monthly now, covered by assistance programs I'd helped her navigate. Each med represented freedom from Polly's manipulation. Dad marked the deliveries on a calendar, not tracking costs, but celebrating another month of Mom's health. We'd learned to protect ourselves with documentation and boundaries, but more importantly, we'd learned to value what couldn't be calculated. Mom's laughter at Dad's jokes, garden tomatoes warm from the sun, quiet evenings without the click of calculator keys. The family photos went back on the walls, not the ones Polly had documented for their frame values, but the ones that captured actual moments. Birthday parties before invoices, holidays before spreadsheets, a time when love was assumed, not audited. I kept working at the hospital, helping other families navigate financial crises without losing their humanity. Each time I prevented someone from being exploited during their vulnerability, I thought of Mom's blue lips and empty med bottles. Never again. Polly remained on the edges of our life, held at distance by legal boundaries and hard-won wisdom. Her restitution payments continued, small acknowledgments of the damage she'd done. We used them for Mom's care, transforming her calculated cruelty into healing. The raised garden beds Dad built became Mom's sanctuary. She grew flowers among the vegetables, beauty that served no calculated purpose. Sometimes I'd find her sitting among the plants, breathing easily, heart steady, finally free. Our story wasn't unique. The support group Dad attended was full of similar tales. Adult children who'd turned love into leverage, families broken by calculated greed. But there were also stories of recovery, of boundaries established and relationships rebuilt on healthier ground. Mom celebrated her 75th birthday with a small party. No invoices, no calculations, just family and friends sharing cake and stories. Dad gave her a handmade jewelry box. I gave her a photo album of her garden through the seasons. Simple gifts that celebrated who she was, not what she cost. The financial recovery took time, but our emotional recovery took longer. Trust, once shattered by calculated betrayal, rebuilt slowly. We learned to accept help without suspicion, to give without keeping score, to be family without being business partners. Polly's therapy continued, mandated by the court but perhaps finally taking root. Her messages became less frequent, less calculated. The last one contained no numbers at all, just a brief note saying she was learning to see things differently. I'm really curious how those distant relatives already knew about Polly's patterns. Does that mean she'd been doing this calculating thing for years before it got this bad? We chose cautious hope over bitter resentment. Not reconciliation, not yet, maybe never, but acknowledgement that obsession could be treated, that people could change if they chose to, that even calculated hearts might learn to love without keeping score. Mom's heart kept its rhythm, steady and strong. The medications worked, the assistance programs continued, the garden grew. We'd survived Polly's calculated assault on our family by refusing to accept her valuation. Love wasn't a transaction, family wasn't a spreadsheet, and some things remained priceless, no matter how many decimal places you tried to add. Appreciate you sticking around and getting curious with me today. I had a blast diving into all these questions together. Can't wait to explore more wild stories with you soon. Subscribe for more content like this.